Okay, hello everyone. This is Colin Cox, and this is the Week 10 audio lecture for English 1010 here at Northeast State Community College. So, as I mentioned in last week's audio lecture, we have officially shifted or transitioned to the research essay, which is the final big assignment for the semester. But before you write and submit your research essay, you will complete this research essay benchmark assignment. I would strongly encourage you, if you did not listen to last week's audio lecture, to do so, but that prompt a series of different examples of how to, for example, write a abstract, how to annotate sources. All of that is in the research essay benchmark module, but I might jump between those two modules, the research essay benchmark module and the research essay module, until we are far closer to the end of the semester. So please keep that in mind. That's one of the reasons why I made the research essay module available, is because to, I suppose, complete the benchmark assignment, you need to have a sense of what I want you to write, the kind of research essay you are expected to write for this class. And again, I won't necessarily address that in this audio lecture because I did speak about it last week. But what I want to do today is begin, and I'll do this over the next couple of weeks, begin a conversation about how to not only find sources, but perhaps more importantly, how to assess the credibility of sources. And again, this is a conversation that I think will take a couple of weeks to have in its entirety. But yeah, for today, let us talk about assessing sources, this question of credibility, what that means, how you should think about credibility for potential sources that you want to incorporate into a research essay, etc. So when I use a word like credibility, one of the things, I'll start with what I don't want you to think. And what I don't want you to think is that assessing the credibility of a source exists on a binary scale, which is to say, I don't want you to think that sources are either credible or they are not credible, because I think sources and the degree to which something is credible is far more complicated than that. As always, I like to imagine this exists on a kind of spectrum where there are certain things that a source can have, may have, that increases and enhances its credibility, and there may be things that a source lacks that decreases its credibility. So again, here, I would encourage you to think of sources as either having a certain set of characteristics or information that's clear and available to you that may increase its credibility, or it may lack certain essential pieces of information, things you may not know, that decrease its credibility. And one of the things you can do to ensure that your sources are potentially more credible is to use the information that's available through the online databases made available through Northeast State Community College, specifically our library's website. And there will be an announcement in the announcements feed referencing some of the specific information that I mentioned in this audio lecture. But yeah, the information that's available through those databases is incredibly useful. And I would also encourage you to think, well, your tuition dollars help to pay for access to those databases. Therefore, it's a good idea to use them. Now, with that said, and you'll notice this on the prompt, I don't, specifically the prompt for the research essay, I don't indicate that you must have a certain number of sources from those online databases. That is to say, it is acceptable to have sources that you find, for example, on the internet, sources from books that you might find in the library, so on and so forth. All of that is acceptable, but I would like to see at least the presence of some of those database sources. So one of the best places to start is a database called Opposing Viewpoints. Now, Opposing Viewpoints is great for a few different reasons. If you are struggling, if you have had difficulty deciding on a topic, Opposing Viewpoints is a great place to start. And I want to emphasize this point. Think of Opposing Viewpoints as a place to start, but this is not the only one of these online library databases that you can and should use. Again, it's a great place to start. When you go to the main page of opposing viewpoints, you can search for possible topics, but if you scroll down a bit, you should see a box that allows you to just see an alphabetical list of possible sources. And as I am recording this video, it appears as though there are close to 500 possible topics. Now, when you select that, again, it will take you to this alphabetized list. And what you'll see on each and every one of these pages for these possible topics are a few different things. So here I'm just looking at this page. I'll select drug abuse, and you can do the same thing because it's just here at the top and it's easy for our purposes. When you go to this page, you'll see an overview of the topic you have selected, which again, I think is an excellent way to start, especially if what you want to do is not only enhance your credibility by increasing the amount of information you know about a topic, but these broad general summaries and overviews also give you a sense of how people have, are, and want to talk about possible topics, which is also useful and helpful because that will help you better understand the degree to which a possible source is credible. For example, if someone wants to have a conversation about drug abuse and it seems as if they are offering a position or arguing a point that just seems so wildly incongruous with how most people discuss something like drug abuse, that doesn't necessarily mean that source or that individual, or it could be a collection of possible researchers. It doesn't mean they're wrong necessarily, but what I think it does mean is they have far more work to do to establish the credibility of their argument than someone who makes a set of arguments that's consistent with how a particular discipline discusses that topic at large. Again, they have just more work to do to establish the credibility of their argument. So I think this is one of those times where it's a great idea to pause and just reflect on this point about credibility. If you are thinking of or considering incorporating sources that are so far afield from a discipline or a set of arguments within a discipline, that doesn't mean they're wrong. That doesn't mean their argument's invalid. They simply have more work to do to establish the credibility of their arguments. So these overviews can be useful for those reasons because it provides so much for you as someone who potentially wants to write about a topic. And I think it can be incredibly useful as well if it's a topic you maybe know very little about and you want to use this research essay as an opportunity to just learn something new, perhaps expand and broaden your horizons. That's, I suppose, one of the things college is designed to do. When you scroll down, though, what you'll also see, again, all of this feels quite curated, and that's really the point. You'll see to the right a possible list of academic journals and specific essays, pieces, etc., that you could theoretically incorporate into your research essay. You may also see here to the left a series of featured viewpoints that again may provide additional and useful context. You'll also see primary sources, additional references, videos, images. All of this again can be quite useful. News, magazines, websites. Again, the goal here with something like opposing viewpoints is to provide as many resources as possible to help you better understand a topic. But something else that I also like about opposing viewpoints, more often than not, and it really depends on the particular topic, but when you select, and this is back to the top, when you select to expand that overview, you'll see a series of blue boxes. And again, I think these blue boxes can be extremely useful because one of the consistent blue boxed pieces of information you'll see is about main ideas, or in one of those blue boxes, you'll see opposing viewpoints describe a set of main ideas that seems important to a broad topic. Something like, for example, drug abuse. If you continue to scroll down, typically you'll see a second blue box, and this blue box offers a set of critical thinking questions. Now, if you read the research essay benchmark prompt in detail, you'll know that of those three benchmarks, the first one requires you to not only identify your topic, but identify the question that really leads and guides your research. I think these critical thinking questions are a great resource to help you better understand the sorts of questions that are important to particular topics. Again, whether it's something like drug abuse, or again, there's close to 500 topics on opposing viewpoints. Having a clear sense of the questions that are important and significant to a topic matters, because as I've discussed throughout this semester, if you have a clear sense of the question that, whether it's a research essay or not, if you have a clear sense of the question or questions that your essay hopes to address and answer, that offers some focus, it places barriers and parameters around your essay, and it's also a fantastic way of embedding within that brainstorming process a clear path toward a thesis statement, because you could argue more often than not your answer to that question, or to those questions that really guide the writing, and if it's a research essay, the researching of an essay. If you have a clear sense of the question that you want to answer, when you have an answer to it, you often have your thesis statement as well. So in summary, opposing viewpoints is a fantastic place to start. It provides essential information, whether it's an overview or background information, but it also, and I think this is, again, particularly important for anyone who wants to write an essay about a topic that they are relatively unfamiliar with, it provides a lot of useful information that will help you better understand how people who write and research about this topic like to think about this topic. And again, that is quite useful and helpful, because one of the hardest things in particular about writing a research essay is feeling as if you do not know, or feeling as if you do not have a sense of which lines of research you should follow, not having a clear sense of how people who write or research about particular topics within a particular discipline actually do the work of writing and researching about that topic within that discipline. Again, at times the research essay process can feel quite listless. You can feel, understandably so, quite adrift. Anything you can do to feel as if there are barriers, parameters, directions you can and should follow, those are all good things. And I think opposing viewpoints offers that. Again, it creates these barriers. It helps to answer certain questions. It helps to clarify particular assumptions. So whether you know the topic you want to write about, or if you're someone who either doesn't know, maybe you're deliberating, even if you have a sense of what you want to write about, I would encourage you, go to opposing viewpoints and see if there is an opposing viewpoints page, because again, it might help to provide that essential information that you need to ensure that you know which directions to follow within the research process. Again, what sorts of assumptions, what sorts of ideas people who write and research about particular topics like to consider. So, opposing viewpoints, fantastic resource. So another excellent resource is Academic OneFile. This is also available through the library databases. It's not part of those featured databases to the right where you may have found opposing viewpoints, but when you go to that database or databases page, it's the first one listed. Academic OneFile, and the word Gale appears in parentheses. Now, the biggest differences between Academic OneFile and opposing viewpoints, Academic OneFile allows you to search for particular pieces of information instead of providing a broad overview of a topic, which is what opposing viewpoints does. With Academic OneFile, you can search for particular sources, particular pieces of information. Now, again, I'll return to this throughout this research essay process. When you're on that main Academic OneFile page, you'll see this basic search function, and then below it, you'll see the option for the advanced search. There's a video in Yuja that will appear. I may make it available sooner rather than later, where I discuss how to use advanced search. And I also say a little something about just how these databases work when you do the work of actually searching for information, because this is an important thing to remember. These online databases are not like Google. What I mean by that is, when you want to know something, when you want to Google something, typically what we do, we'll write a question or type a question, or it'll be this long, overwrought thing. With these academic online databases, you cannot do that. If you typed, for example, a question into the basic search bar, it may provide some information, but that's not the logic these databases use to find, isolate, and provide information for someone using them. They work instead with keywords and short phrases. So, for example, if we think about the topic that I just used for opposing viewpoints, which was drug abuse, if you typed into the search or the basic search bar, what are some important statistics about drug abuse, you may find, again, some information, but that is not the best or the optimal way to use these academic online library databases. Instead, you may want to begin with something simple like drug abuse. Again, short phrases, keywords, and I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again here. I'll speak more about the advanced search function, because what that allows you to do is actually combine different phrases, different keywords to refine your search. But that's one of the first things that I want, and I think one of the most important things that I want everyone to know and understand. If you try to use these databases like Google, you will probably be frustrated, because that's not the logic these databases use to provide information. So again, instead of questions, use keywords, short phrases. That's the best thing to do. So I want to close here by offering an illustration of the kinds of, or the kind of information that these online academic databases provide. And again, return to this question, or return to this topic that I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture, which is notions of credibility. So what I have done here, I'm on Academic One file. I simply typed drug abuse into the search or the basic search bar. You should see something around 335,000 sources. I simply want to use the first one. The title is Navigating Public, Semi-Public, and Private Drug Use Environments, a qualitative examination of unsheltered homelessness and drug use in Baltimore City. Now, I don't want to read this. I don't want you to read that. Excuse me, I don't want you to read this. That's not the point. What I want to do is take a second. I want us to ask a simple question, which is, do we think, without having read it, and this is, again, I think a question worth asking before even reading a source, do I think this is a credible source or not? In addition to that, or connected to that, do I think this is relevant for the essay I want to write? So let's start with just what information do we have? So we know, for example, that we didn't just find this on the internet. We didn't find this through Google. We found this through an academic online database. We see, for example, a title. We see a list of possible authors, and all of their names are hyperlinked. And I think knowing the name of the author or authors matters, because, and again, this seems simple, but it's important. If someone does not provide their name, if it is not something that you can source back to a single author or a group of researchers, I think at that point it may lack credibility. Now, again, there are a variety of reasons why someone might remain anonymous, but I think knowing an author's name, or knowing the names of people who wrote and researched for a particular essay, paper, whatever, I think all of that is important, because think about what it allows you to do. If you know a name, you can then learn more about this person. You can learn more about their level of expertise. Is it someone who has researched within a particular discipline about a particular topic, or is it just a random person? And again, I want to be very clear about this. Credentials do not necessarily, and experience does not necessarily make a source immediately credible. But it's a good place to start. Again, here, what we're attempting to do more than anything else is understand what we know and use that information and knowledge to assess the credibility of a source. So, with this particular essay paper, we know the title, we know the names of the authors. We also know when it was published. And again, I think this is really important because, and it may be the degree to which it is important, something like the publication date, certainly depends not just on the topic, but on the way you want to approach a topic. If, for example, you want to write a research essay about drug abuse, but you're using information published 40, 50 years ago, that information still might be relevant, but a lot has changed in 40 or 50 years. And this is true for most topics. Again, having the newest information does not automatically make something credible, but when you do not know when something was published, I think simply not knowing that may complicate the credibility and the viability of a source. Something else we know, this was published through an academic journal, Public Library of Science, and we also know that this was peer reviewed. Now, I'll say a little more about the peer review process. For now, though, the best way to think about the peer review process when something, and again, like everything else I've said, knowing that something is peer reviewed doesn't automatically make it credible, but it's another step. The peer review process, quite simply, for academic journals that insist upon peer-reviewed material. What that basically means is someone writes something, or a group of researchers write something before a particular journal publishes it. They ask other writers and researchers within that discipline, maybe individuals who have written and researched about this topic, they ask them to read it, assess it, and offer their commentary and criticism. So what this does, because imagine a research essay that 2 or 3 people peer review, and what they conclude is, hey, this is an interesting idea, but it lacks some of the things that we think are necessary to make the argument credible. Therefore, we think these revisions need to happen or occur before we would endorse it as something that a peer-reviewed academic journal should and could publish. So what you're receiving, or what benefits you when you choose to possibly incorporate or cite a peer-reviewed essay, is just the assurance that more than the people or the person who wrote this particular essay or paper, they've read it and offered their thoughts. There was a kind of editorial mechanism in place. And I think, again, just knowing that, it doesn't necessarily make the argument correct. The argument needs to stand on its own. It needs to stand on its own merit, but that enhances potentially the level of credibility, knowing that something was peer reviewed. Because as I suspect all of you know, it is really quite easy for anyone to just write whatever they want and throw it on the internet, and it's very difficult to know if anyone read it, if anyone edited it, if the person who wrote and published it consulted anyone else. With the peer review process, you at the very least know other people were consulted aside from or in addition to the person or people who wrote it. Something else that I like about a lot of these sources and resources that are available through something like Academic OneFile, typically at the beginning, before you begin reading the body of the essay or paper itself, you'll see something called an abstract. So 2 possible benefits for you, all of you. First, this provides just yet more examples of what abstracts can look like and read like. But as I mentioned last week, an abstract is, in many ways, an elevator pitch or a preview or a statement of purpose about a research essay, a paper, whatever. So before you actually do the work of reading the essay itself to see if it would be appropriate for you and the particular research essay you want to write, read the abstract because titles can be deceptive. If the abstract sounds good, that at the very least gives you greater or heightened assurance that you will not waste your time reading this essay. Because again, this is yet another frustrating aspect of the research essay process, the amount of failure that, and it's not exclusive to students, this is true for academic professionals who write, publish, and produce this kind of content. They fail as well. They think they found something that might be useful and it just wasn't. Anything you can do to not just save yourself the time, but also save yourself from the disappointment of dedicating time to reading something that you later realize simply will not work, that's something you should do. So having an abstract, reading that abstract, in addition to possibly enhancing the credibility, it's something that's just great to have for you on your end so that you do not waste your time reading something that may or may not be applicable to or relevant to the particular essay that you want to write. So, in summary, again, one of the things I wanted to do in this lecture was begin a conversation about credibility. Some of the things that I've mentioned, again, just in summary, where was it published? And when I say that, I don't mean was it just published in an academic journal, but also where did you find it? Did you find it through a search engine like Google, or did you find it through an academic online library database affiliated with a college or university? For each and every possible source, are there names attached or associated with that source? Do you know the name or the names of the people who wrote it? Is there a publication date? Was it peer reviewed? All of these things, again, knowing these things, imagine these are really a series of boxes that you hope to check. And what I don't want you to think, I mentioned this at the beginning, but I'll repeat it here. If you successfully check all of these boxes, now you know this is a credible source. Because again, I don't think credibility works like that. I don't think credibility exists or I don't think credibility is a binary situation where something is either credible or it's not. I think credibility exists on a kind of spectrum where, again, there are certain things you would want to know that would possibly enhance the credibility of a source, information that hopefully the source provides, and conversely, if that source or a possible source lacks that information, that may suggest to you that, hey, this is just not a credible source. So again, the important thing here, think of credibility as something that exists on a continuum, not as something as simple as a binary, which is to say there's credible sources and there are those non-credible sources. Things are far more complicated than that. Well, I think that's where I want to stop for this week. Again, we will continue these conversations about source credibility, how to find information in future lectures. But for now, this is Colin Cox for English 1010 here at Northeast State Community College. Have a nice day, and I hope to talk to you soon.